it's gone. Brody Kostecki is the king of the mountain. He got it pulled up. He made it. He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day Supercars fans, James Pavey here, lead journalist for Supercars.com. We've got a new concept running this year for Supercars.com, the Summer Cool Down, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. I've got Zach Dowdle with me, my fellow colleague, Supercars nerd and fan. How you going, mate?
Good, thank you, Paves. A new co-driver for you on the Cool Down series of podcasts, but hopefully I can step in and do the job.
I think you will, mate. It's been a huge year in Supercars and, 12 rounds, 24 races. We've seen 8 different individual winners, but for a lot of that part of the season, you just don't really know what's going to happen next. But with this new concept, we're going to count down from each team, starting with Blanchard Racing Team. And Zach, from Supercars main game across to the Dunlop Series, it's been a huge year for BRT, as we know. But going from one car to 2 cars is a massive leap, isn't it?
It's a massive leap for any team, and especially one that's as young as the Blanchard Racing Team, having only stepped out as its own entity in 2021. And especially when you're bringing up a young guy like Aaron Love as well, fresh out of Super 2 and only the one season of Super 2. It was always going to be a tough year for the Blanchard Racing Team, and unfortunately it has shown that. But in saying that, there were some glimpses of potential there for years to come. So it's definitely not all doom and gloom for BRT, and we even saw in Super 2 Jack Perkins making a 4-race cameo and winning 2 of them, claiming a round win for the first time since 2019 as well. So definitely not all bad news for BRT, but it definitely was a tough season.
It was always going to be a bit of a leap of faith for this team, getting someone like James Courtney, who has achieved so much in this sport, 15 race wins, a championship, as we all know, in 2010, but this was another opportunity for him to go, okay, cool, I'm outside of a really big team. What can I do? And I think he impressed a lot of people. I think there were moments through the season, you look at Perth, he was battling really hard with Nick Percat. There was a shootout performance in Townsville as well. But towards the end of the year, he really got some momentum going, didn't he?
And we can always expect that from James Courtney, especially on street circuits where a driver can make such a big impact with such big commitment. And we've seen over the years, James Courtney, he is a street circuit master. And that really has helped the Blanchard Racing Team. And as you said, there were especially glimpses from JC throughout the year. I mean, that Townsville shootout performance you mentioned, there was a time there where everyone was thinking he was going to come from the clouds to claim a pole position, which would have been absolutely extraordinary. But even in saying that, Gold Coast and Adelaide, there was pace to end the year as well. If they can just keep on building on that through next year as well, especially if it is James Courtney's last year, like we're all expecting it to be, I definitely can see there being James Courtney perhaps winding back the clock a little bit on 1 or 2 occasions, maybe bringing home some silverware for the Blanchard Racing Team on a good day.
Well, they've all got their racer's edge, aren't they? When they put the helmet on, they want to get really right into the guts of it. I think JC is a big smiley guy. He loves racing and he's really popular in the paddock, but you see more often than not, he's really aggressive. They're the things that Aaron Love, I think, will be keen to take away from this year, is when to be aggressive, when to be fast, because there were accidents throughout the year and even moments when he would look back and go, I didn't need to do that. Look at the Bathurst 500, crashing twice at the cutting, really disappointing for him. But even then, a shootout performance for him, luck or whatever it was in Adelaide, that's a massive confidence boost for him, but it's the races where you really get your bacon.
And a shootout's a great experience as well. It's not very often you can make it into a top 10 shootout. I mean, there's 24 cars on the grid, so it's a less than 50% chance that you're one of those cars to make it into the shootout. So for Aaron in particular, that was a really good experience for him, and he did a real good job in that shootout as well. Sure, he fell back in the race, but he's an inexperienced guy. This is only his second season in Supercars machinery. He's only spent the 1 year in Super 2 in the lead up to this, and even then, it was a bit of a mixed season for Aaron in Super 2. And I think the Bathurst 1000 last year was a prime example of that. I mean, he dominated on the Friday to claim the victory and then had a massive shunt in Saturday Dunlop Series qualifying that, it ended his weekend. So, definitely a big punt from Tim Blanchard to promote someone like Aaron Love so early when they definitely, I think, could have given Aaron another year in Super 2 just to iron out some of those kinks. But at the end of the day, Aaron Love is a very, very talented race car driver. I mean, this is a guy who nearly won the Carrera Cup title a few years ago despite missing 2 rounds. Like, that doesn't happen very often in such a close and competitive series like Carrera Cup. So the talent's definitely there, and I think having James Courtney there in his corner for another year full time, that can only be of benefit for him.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. Well, Zach, I think it's time to look at this team's performance and the stats. I know you and I both love stats. We write about them all year, but how do we best paint the picture for Blanchard Racing Team in 2024? So you look at the head-to-heads here. Qualifying head-to-head, James leads Aaron 17-7. The race head-to-head, James leads 15-9. So, of course, the old dog still got it, but there were moments for Aaron as well, to pull through and get a result. I think you look as far as maybe Perth when James got that P6. That was a weekend he was willing to get his elbows out with Nick Percat. But apart from that, I'm not going to be too critical and say slim pickings, because this is a team that knows where they are at the moment. It's their first year as a two-car team. So I think if you're reading a lot of stories about this team and where they want to head, it's all good things from my opinion. I think Tim Blanchard's always been very honest about that. There have been a lot of changes that we've spoken about engineers and things through the year, and that's always going to be quite, you might destabilise a team a little bit, but they've got the right things in place to be successful one day. They probably knew it was going to happen in their first year, but would you look at those stats and think, well, it doesn't really paint the picture of their season?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, James Courtney, he's a proven performer in this series. He loves this category as well. So that's probably not too much of a surprise. It's definitely a year of learnings for Aaron, more than anything in particular. It's been a tough old year for Aaron, to be honest. I mean, sure, start the year at the Bathurst 500 with a couple of crashes, identical crashes. That's always going to knock your confidence, and you're always going to be trying to build from that moment onwards. And I think, sure, there were the odd incident here and there. And I mean, we've seen the performances of Aaron Cameron, his co-driver at the Enduros as well. I mean, maybe Aaron Love might be looking over his shoulder a little bit, going forward. But at the same time, if you're the Blanchard Racing Team, you got James Courtney retiring at the end of next year. I mean, how many changes do you want to make to your driver lineup? I really do think that stability is the way to go for them, at least for next year. And then going forward as well, I mean, Tim Blanchard seems very committed to Aaron Love as a long-term project. And it would be very cool to see Aaron Love make that next step forward next year because, I mean, as we've said before, he's got the talent to do it. He just needs that experience in supercars machinery.
Well, let's talk about next year. It's a longer season, 13 rounds, 34 races, a lot of opportunity to get a good result and make a name for yourself, especially with these new formats, different tyres for different qualifying and race. For Aaron Love, coming back to a second season in the sport where you've seen these tracks and these cars, you might know what to expect, but there could be little bits of change on the horizon. There are reports that one of the guys might at least run an Erebus-built chassis next year. So there's little things that could give this team a shot in the arm. Starting the season in Sydney, it's a familiar hunting ground for all of these guys, but then obviously there's the all-in test a few days before as well. So 2025, I mean, for starters, it could be JC's last season. He's probably already flagged that well and truly. But for Aaron Love, we've heard team bosses speak about this before. Even Jamie Whincup said, hey, look, you got to give young guys at least 2 years to prove themselves. I think Aaron would probably look back at this year and probably say, hey, look, if I get that chance next year, which at the moment we believe he will, he'll take it with both hands. But 2025, there mightn't be much Super 2 running for these guys as well. So BRT, 25, what do you reckon?
The Erebus chassis has to be a good thing for them, right? They've proven since last year, Erebus, are they the best chassis in supercars at the moment? I mean, it's very close between them and Triple Eight, isn't it? So I think that chassis is going to be really good for them. Second year for Aaron Love. Again, he's going to have experience to the vast majority of these tracks, save for Queensland Raceway. But then again, that's 12 of 13 tracks that he has past experience at, which, again, that can only be of benefit for him as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see where Blanchard's go next year. And then, of course, there'll be a question floating around of who eventually replaces James Courtney if it is his last season. I think Aaron Cameron's put in a very good argument to be taking one of those seats at the Blanchards for 2026 and beyond. I mean, his Super 2 season this year was absolutely outstanding with the Kellys. To be fighting against Eggleston and Walkinshaw and Andretti United with a small family-run operation, You got to have a bit of talent to do that, and he's proven that he is talented across a wide range of categories and cars and different configurations of drivetrains and all that sort of thing. So, and he's the Mike Cable Young Gun Award winner for the year as well, which was more than justified. So, next year's gonna be really interesting for the Blanchards. I think might be baby steps for them to start off the year, but hopefully we see some really good results for them before the end of the year, because I can think of, James Courtney having a strong weekend at Adelaide to end his career. It doesn't really sound that far-fetched, especially if the Blanchards can progress forward up the grid.
So moving up the grid is going to be the prime ambition for the Blanchard racing team, as it will be for all teams, as we're reviewing in our summer cool-down season reviews brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
Well, James Pavey here from supercars.com. Welcome back to our summer cool-down season reviews, proudly brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Zach Dowdle, my fellow colleague, supercars nut, nerd. I don't know what else to call you, mate, but we love supercars. We love racing. How good's this?
That's fantastic, Paves. First episode ran without a hitch, and we'll keep the train rolling.
So a 4-car team, Brad Jones Racing, it's a hard thing to do in supercars. Not many teams have been too successful with this model, but they're persisting with it. They burst out of the blocks with Gen 3 last year. Andre Harmgartner was amongst the podiums. A bit tougher to come by this year, Zach.
I mean, it's a really interesting season for Brad Jones Racing, because if you look at just the highlights of their season to someone who might not follow supercars closely, and you say, well, they won a race this year. They got 2 cars on the podium for the first time since 2020. It's a great season, right? It's not really, though, for Brad Jones Racing. Definitely a noticeable drop-off from their 2023 performances, particularly for Andre Heimgartner and Bryce Fullwood. It's just one lap pace really cruelled their season, unfortunately. Very hard to fight through this pack when everyone's so evenly matched. Towards the end of the year, their qualifying performances started to pick up a bit more, and Andre Heimgartner in particular was able to fight in sort of the back end of the top 10. But even then, Andre, he will want to fight even further up the field, particularly after the promise they showed in 2023.
So if there are stats that paint the picture of BJR's season, they were really good in the races, and we'll get to that in a second, but you look at the average start for the 24 guys who did most of the racing this year. Andre's 16th on average, Bryce Fullwood is 19th, Jackson Evans is a rookie, granted, 22nd, and Macca Jones, 23rd. It's going to be hard to get any sort of race result if you're qualifying down the back more often than they are. So I think if they're looking at the off-season to find some performance, they've got to find some in one-lap pace, because we know how good they are in the races. We know how good they are in pit lane. Unfortunately, it wasn't their year in the pit stop challenge this year, but they are one of the best, if not the best, pit crews we've ever seen in the sport. But one-lap pace is really going to determine how they go next year. And it's going to be more important next year than ever, because all these races, 34 races, different tyre compounds as well. We know how strong they are on the wet weather stuff. I mean, Andre's performance in Topor is the clear highlight for that team, a really impressive result, and long overdue as well. This is his 3rd season with the team, as it is for Bryce Fullwood as well. But you look at those qualifying numbers, and it probably paints a picture of where they went wrong.
100%. And as you said, next year is going to be so crucial to roll out of the truck quickly, particularly with the limited testing next year as well. Only 2 all-in tests allowed in supercars next year, and no private testing. So that's going to be a really interesting factor to see how that affects the running order. As you said, though, Andre's drive in Topor in the wet, that was absolutely outstanding. And I mean, there was a time there where I think BJR and everyone was sort of daring to dream that the Jason Richards Memorial Trophy would go to a Kiwi driving the BJR car number 8, which would have been incredibly fitting. Didn't quite come off after the Sunday performance, which it still wasn't a bad performance by any means, but at the end of the day, just didn't quite have the consistency that Anton De Pasquale did in the Shell V-Power Mustang. But yeah, just a really, really tricky season for BJR, and they'll definitely be looking to improve their one-lap pace next year.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. So looking across the other cars as well, Bryce Fullwood had a standout year last year. Didn't get that podium. He did get that podium this year. We can't we can't not talk about that because that was such an impressive performance, and we can't even begin to imagine what must have been going through his head when he saw Thomas Randall hit Brock Feeney at the hairpin, because that ultimately is what delivered that podium. But we've also got to do a big shout out as well to Macca Jones and Jackson Evans. It's so hard to be a rookie in this game, isn't it? I mean, we saw those awful images of Jackson going to the wall at turn 8, but his year was much more than that incident, that's for sure. But Macca Jones as well, I've got an interesting stat here as well. Of the 24 guys who did most of the races this year, when you put their average start against their average finish, Macca Jones is third. So he's moving forward in these races. He was BJR's lead car in the Repco Bathurst 1000 as well. So for a guy who's been around for a long time, he's done more than 100 races. That was a pretty under-the-radar season for Macca as well. But when you sign someone like Jackson Evans as well, you've got to hope that you can get him into a good car that can get some good qualifying performance and get him to move forward. He was really good at Topor and home soil, but they'll be really keen to try and maximise what he's capable of.
I mean, if you're a Porsche factory driver once upon a time in your career, you can clearly drive, right? And Jackson Evans, I mean, with all due respect, he's got that SCT entry into some places which we haven't really seen it before, which has been really encouraging. And yes, that accident at Adelaide, it was a nasty, nasty accident. Ultimately ruled him out of the final race of the year on the Sunday. But in saying that, I still think there's definitely a lot of potential there for Jackson. And you can say that there were flashes of potential across all 4 BJR cars throughout the year. Macca's drive at Bathurst, really under the radar, but just rock solid, didn't really put a foot wrong. And I think a lot of people forget that this is a guy who, if it wasn't for some awful luck throughout the 2018 season, he would have been the Super 2 champion. So he can drive. And then Bryce's podium in Tasmania, as you said, yeah, there was a bit of luck there, no doubt, but you have to be in a position to capitalise on that. And Bryce was on that day, and he was charging forward. He did have genuinely good pace. He wanted to capitalise on it for the rest of the year. Didn't quite eventuate that way, but again, there's signs there for Brad Jones Racing to, I guess, carry the momentum into 2025. Which they're all going to be looking to do as well, because obviously it's going to be all important to be in that top 10 after the Repco Bathurst 1000 to get into the finals for next year. So, yeah, they're going to be pushing to get in that 10 for sure.
We talk about the finals, and when you've got 4 cars, you know, the numbers are kind of on your side, performance willing, but Heimgartner at minimum in the finals would be the ultimate goal for that team. But you look at Bryce's performance at certain stages of the year, who knows what Macca and Jackson will be able to do if they can get their qualifying right. But at minimum, surely Heimgartner in the finals is the 2025 goal for BJR.
I think Andre's established himself as the team leader. There's no doubt. We've seen that at his highest peak, he is near untouchable on his day, especially in the wet conditions where he's really established himself as one of the wet weather masters. I think the key for Andre is just to have a bit more consistency. He doesn't have to reach the same ceiling, but if he can finish on the podium a bit more regularly, I think that'll really help him out in the run for finals next year. And I mean, even Bryce as well. He finished 11th in the standings last year. So if he can have that some sort of a same level of performance as he did last year, then there's no reason to suggest that Bryce can't challenge for finals next year either.
You raise a good point there. I'm not a meteorologist. It's a tough word, but I'm not a meteorologist, Zach. And if there is a bit of rain around in Sydney, who knows? I mean, Andre got that pole there in 2020 with Kelly Racing, and also got one in 2023 with BJR as well. And they were quick out of the blocks at that super test in 2023 as well. So who knows what BJR could achieve next year. It's going to be a huge year for that team, our favourite Sons from Albury. You can hear more about BJR and other teams in our Summer Cool Down Lap series, brought to you by City Rural Insurance.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day, James Paver here from supercars.com, here with my mate Zach Dowdle for the Summer Cool Down season reviews, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Zach, we've made it to Team 18. Wow, what a season for this team on and off the racetrack. Holy smokes.
There's a bit to unpack here, isn't there? Start of the year, we think they're onto a winning formula, don't we? Adrian Burgess comes in behind the scenes. David Reynolds comes in as a driver off the back of some really hot form at the back end of 2023 with Grove Racing. And we come to the end of the season and Mark Winterbottom's on the way out. They haven't really got the results that perhaps you'd expect from such a driver lineup that they had. And it's just been a really, I think, a frustrating season for Team 18, and I'm sure they'll be feeling the same internally.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of firepower off the track. You talk about Adrian Burgess, who has massive experience, but the guys there like Jeff Slater, Som Sharma, a really good engineer as well. So they have the right people there. Whether that's the right tools as well remains to be seen. But you're right, they started out of the gate. I mean, David Reynolds was equal fourth in the championship at the Bathurst 500. There were good moments as well at the Grand Prix. Frosty got that amazing podium and then got another podium in Darwin, but as well, kind of rocks and diamonds for these guys, unfortunately. And you get to August and Frosty's ready for another contract, and then it wasn't to be. But I think there's a lot of highlights there for those guys. I mean, not many teams can say they got more than one podium this year. They got two, and it was the guy that's departing the team. So your assessment of Team 18's year on a whole, a couple of stats we can paint the picture in a second, but those two podiums for Frosty I thought were really impressive, and we've got a really impressive stat about Frosty we'll get to in a second, but Reynolds' first year as well had a real mixture of moments, didn't it?
It certainly did. I mean, Bathurst 500, as you said, Dave Reynolds comes out of the gate, all guns blazing. I recall there was even that one session, can't remember if it was the Saturday or the Sunday, where he had a car issue and he literally had one lap to get it in the shootout, and he nailed it too. And that was a really impressive performance. And then the year rolls on, and Dave sort of falls away a little bit, and start to think how much of that is Dave gelling with Bathurst, perhaps the season opening performance for Dave Reynolds. And then you got Frosty, who really struggled with one lap pace, as we'll touch on soon. But in saying that, the only two times he really qualified anywhere near the front all year, he walks away with trophies. So clearly the car is there on its day. It's just, once again, it's almost a bit of a running theme with quite a few teams up and down the paddock, and especially in the midfield. It's just one lap pace that's really holding them back from progressing further up the grid and challenging for stronger results on a regular basis.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. There's always going to be a fascinating season for Team 18. A guy like Scott Pye moves on, high caliber driver. A guy like David Reynolds comes in, high caliber driver. So Charlie Schwerkolt wants to make this work, and they're getting the keys to success for this team. But ultimately, the results are what you can judge a team off. So you look at their head-to-heads. Qualifying head-to-head, David Reynolds 15, Mark Winterbottom 9. Race head-to-head, David Reynolds 12, Mark Winterbottom 12. So you can see where they were sort of evened up. But, a team's championship finish of 10th for these guys, they won't be happy with that. They've got a lot of firepower in the sheds, but with Mark moving on, Anton coming in, which we'll get to in a second, there are some results here that I thought were quite pertinent towards Frosty's year as well. I mean, yes, it's sort of a double-edged sword. If you don't qualify well, if you race well, congratulations, that's a pretty good performance. But Frosty topped a lot, 24 drivers. When you put his average start against his average finish, he gained at least, on average, 3.2 positions per race, which in a 24-car field, you really see that performance.
100%. And it's like I said before, when he was up the front, he stayed up the front. And when he was further back, yes, he pushed through a little bit, but when you're starting so far back, there's only so much you can do to sort of recover, apart from the odd occasion where you might see someone tear their way through the field and do something really, really impressive. But Frosty, you could tell there was frustration there, especially in quali trim, and even for Dave from time to time throughout the year. But for Dave Reynolds in particular, the back end of the year, there was a lot of pace there, but unfortunately, quite a lot of contact with walls too, which really set them back. So, look, the promise is there, particularly on Dave Reynolds' side of the garage. And as you said, Anton De Pasquale comes in next year, which that's going to be a fascinating reunion for Anton and Dave, going back to Erebus days back in the late 2010s. So it's going to be really interesting to see where Team 18 go heading forward.
You talk about Dave and his performance towards the end of the year. He was very, very fast, wasn't he, man? He was nearly a net fourth in qualifying before he found the wall at Dippers. So there was speed there. Unfortunately, they rolled that car out in Gold Coast, got through the weekend, then turn 8 bit again. So those two incidents for me is a guy that's pushing really, really hard, is a guy who really wants pace. Age is just a number. Dave's a Bathurst winner. He's won races before, but when you're having to drive the car that hard, sometimes the pace might be there, sometimes it's not. But ultimately, they'll be frustrated to have to repair a few cars as well. So 2025, Team 18, Anton De Pasquale coming to the team. There were quotes from Ryan Story shortly after that announcement that Anton, he might flourish at a team like this. There's a bit less pressure on him, per se, at a team like Team 18 versus Dick Johnson Racing. There's so much pressure from the fan base in particular. Anton, can he thrive there?
Well, Team 18 have been struggling for one-lap pace, so who better to bring in than a one-lap specialist like Anton De Pasquale? I mean, initially the move seemed kind of bizarre to move from a team like Dick Johnson Racing to Team 18, which a lot of people would consider to be a bit of a step back. But I can understand why he's gone there. I mean, and I can understand why Team 18 also wanted to pursue him. I think that one-lap pace is really something that's holding them back, and if they can unlock that, you've got Anton and Dave, who are both very, very fast race drivers on their day and can both stay at the front as well. I mean, Anton's racecraft, perhaps a little bit of a question mark still there, particularly if he's fighting up the front for strong results. But I think if he has the team around him to support him, I think Anton can really thrive. And I think Dave and Anton, they have a good relationship. They have had a good relationship since they were teammates back at Erebus. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. And I mean, if the rumours keep on swirling, maybe a change of manufacturer for 2026, who knows? But 2025 for sure going to be a very interesting year for Anton and Dave, and could be one of the head-to-head matchups to watch.
It's a great point you raised there, Zach. We're going to talk about a lot of other teams in our Summer Cooldown series, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day, James Baby here from supercars.com. We're going to carry on with our Summer Cooldown season previews, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Zach Dowdle, g'day mate.
Yeah, Paves, how are you, mate?
Not too bad. Well, we're a couple of teams in, and one team I've really enjoyed watching develop in the last few years, let alone this year, Premier Newlon Racing. Zach, what a year for these guys. Wow.
Well, you rewind back to 2022, their first season, and Pete Gibberis makes his intentions very clear that he wants to go to the front and releases Gary Jacobson mid-season, brings in James Golding out of the Supercars wilderness. Fast forward 18 months, and boy, oh boy, Jimmy delivered big time for Premier in 2024. One of the real breakout stars of the season for mine, with a maiden pole position in Darwin, a maiden podium at the Sandown 500, with another massive addition to the team this year in David Russell as co-driver. I think that's been a really fun story to watch, and if they keep on going at this rate, who knows what could be in store for them for 2025.
Well, I saw pretty early on how hard Premier Newlon Racing was going to go for it this year when James Golding went head-to-head with Brock Feeney at the Chase, race 2, the Bathurst 500. They mean business, this team. And you get to Darwin, he gets that pole. Who would have thought that he would go head-to-head with Brock again? Brock gets down the inside. Unlike Darwin, they both stayed on the black stuff, but James's results that day, 4th, awesome, right? He was angry. He was angry about being hit off the road. So it just shows that the mentality of this team, they really want to get trophies. They had to wait until Sandown to get there. But you raise a good point about Dave Russell. He must have delivered so much to that team, not only in confidence, but in strategy, understanding these long races, how to get results. I mean, that's a massive pickup for those guys.
Well, I mean, we've seen the job he's done with Brody Kostecki at Erebus the past few years. He's really established himself as one of the go-to guys in the Enduro season for the big teams. And I mean, a massive get for Premier, and to get an instant result like that, and with such a performance as they did it as well, to go from 14th to 3rd. There was a lot going on that day at Sandown, but they sort of kept their nose clean, and there were incidents going on all around them. And out of nowhere, we just see the 31 Newlon Camaro just pop up in a podium place. And it was a really cool performance. And then to back that up at Bathurst as well, with a solid top 10, mightn't be what they quite wanted, especially given the performance they've displayed at Bathurst, well, since they really began as life as a Supercars team in 2022. James Golding and Premier have always been really strong at Bathurst and really fast. So there's so much to build on there. And I mean, there was a time this year where James Golding even looked like he might be on for a top 5 finish in the championship. It didn't quite eventuate, but still by far a PB for James Golding and Premier in terms of a driver's championship finish in 7th.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. We've got a quick congrats as well to Romy Mayer, who's the only full-time female engineer on the grid. That's a great story in itself. Romy's expecting her second child. So congratulations, Romy, on behalf of us. But it's an interesting story on that part as well, because she'll have to leave at some stage next year to be with her family. And then, what's going to happen for James? They've brought in someone, Simon Hodge, who's going to be a really good addition for that team. He's been there before. He's got the 888 blood running through his veins as well. But, we spoke to Romy after Adelaide and she was like, seventh in championship's great, right? We want to get wins. Fifth was on the cards for us. So, can they win a race next year?
100% they can win a race next year, and I think his new teammate for next year could have a lot to do with pushing him even further forward as well in Richie Stanaway, which is another teammate reunion from 2019 and Gary Rogers Motorsport days. That's going to be really interesting to watch next year to see how Richie goes. We thought Grove Racing was going to be his last chance as a full-timer. If that wasn't, then this has to be, right? It's really coming down to perform or not for Richie, and I think he's going to know that too, and it's really going to be a good benchmark for James as well to really push himself forward. Sladey did a really good job this year as well. Bit of bad luck, unfortunately, in races that really went against him, and ultimately he decided to pull the pin on his full-time supercars career when it became apparent that his services at Premier were no longer required.
Yeah, we do have to talk about Sladey, who's a really good guy, popular guy at the paddock. Slade Dog, as some of us know him. Awesome career for Tim. You look at all the results he's had, those 2 wins at Winton with BJR all those years ago, but he was always so passionate about his racing and how hard he wanted to do it. You don't just fluke a co-drive at Shelby Power Racing alongside Scott McLaughlin. That was what he was able to secure between full-time drives, but you look at the results, it doesn't really paint the nicest picture for Tim, unfortunately. The head-to-heads, 13-11 in Golding's favour, and the race head-to-head was 16-8 in Golding's favour. So, unfortunately for Tim, that last year didn't really go to plan, but there were really good moments for him. But unfortunately, those moments were quickly followed up by some tough stuff. A really good qualifying performance in Topor, mere seconds into the race, he was facing the wrong way out of the wall, and it almost seemed unfair for that to happen. You want those guys to have a good crack at it, and it just never really worked out results-wise in those 2 years at Premier Racing, but there are reports he'll end up with another old mate in a co-drive next year. That'll be announced soon. But, it's an opportunity for Tim to reinvent himself again. You can't forget about how good he was at BRT in that one-car operation. Those top 4s, those quick performances in qualifying. A word for Sladey's career?
Stalwart of the paddock, Tim Slade. You don't hang around in supercars as long as you do without, one, being liked by your peers, and 2, having the talent to go with it. His BJR performances really flew under the radar for mine. But apart from those wins at Winton, which were real standout moments, and I remember him doing the burnouts in the grass and saying that's how we do it in Albury.
Burnout.
More of a dust out maybe, but real solid. And we saw that Topor performance. Sure, the race didn't last that long for him, but he was going for first no matter what. And it just shows you how much of a hard-edged racer Sladey is, and he's going to be a great pickup for wherever he might end up in an enduro seat next year.
Sladey, you're getting a supercars.com thumbs up, mate. You're a good bloke and a good racer, and whatever happens in the future, good luck, mate. I appreciate your time with all of us this year in the media, especially in the fans as well. But 25, before we wrap this one up, 2025, we spoke about it before, Richie Stenaway, what potential that guy has. And when he's in the right mind frame, he is super fast. Disappointing to see how the year went for him for the most part at Grove Racing, but when it almost seemed coincidental when he was announced to join that team, his results just started to really improve. He was the lead forward for quite a while at Bathurst, and then that front row at the Gold Coast, big shunt in Adelaide. We didn't get to see the best of him in those last races, but they are getting a driver with a massive ceiling.
And you look at the engineering group they've got to go, to support Richie. The big one for me, Ludo Lacroix. That's going to be so good for Richie, I think, personally. And we must not forget, too, he's in a 888 built Camaro. Last time he drove one, he won a Bathurst 1000. So right. He knows how to drive a 888 Camaro. And if you can extract that same level of performance out of a Premier car, then, this team could be going places in a real hurry next year. And it's going to be really, really exciting.
Well, we'll hear more about Grove Racing and some other teams in our Summer Cooldown series brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Hear from us.
In 2024, the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day guys, James Pavey from supercars.com, continuing with our summer cooldown season review series brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. I've got my mate Zach Dowdle here. Mate, how you going?
Good, thank you, Paves.
So Zach, we're getting into the midfield of the pack, and it feels a bit remiss for me to say that because one of their drivers at the very least was very much towards the pointy end. We're talking about Matt Stone Racing, a massive breakout years for these guys, a year after another breakout year. It just seems like they're on that trajectory, aren't they?
Well, Matt Stone Racing, 2-time race winner this year. Imagine saying that at the start of the year and actually believing it. They've been another one of these really fun teams to watch throughout the season. And in particular, Nick Percat, this amazing career resurgence that I don't think a lot of people saw coming, but save for Matt Stone Racing and Nick himself. So much to unpack with these guys. It's been a really great year for them.
Feel good story of the year, Nick Percat's resurgence?
I'd have to say so. It's been, he came out and looked really solid at the Bathurst 500, and then you go to the Australian Grand Prix and all of a sudden he's fending off the Red Bulls for a really impressive race win on, barely enough fuel to make it to the finish line, and then to get back around to the podium, he had to get pushed back. So, and then he repeated the dosage once again in Tasmania, and I think that one would have been really, really sweet for Nick Percat, especially to hold off his former teammate Chaz Mostert and Walkinshaw Andretti United. It's no secret that those two parties parted ways in very acrimonious circumstances, and you only have to look at Nick Percat's victory lane interview at the Australian Grand Prix to figure out that. But to hold off Chaz and the Walkinshaw Andretti United Mustang, and Chaz was absolutely flying that day too on an alternate and aggressive tyre strategy. And Nick just drove a very calculated race, and his first multi-win season since 2020 with Brad Jones Racing. It's been an outstanding year, and we've seen once again that Nick Percat really has this knack of extracting incredible levels of performance from perhaps smaller and lesser funded teams than the biggest teams in the lane.
It's an impressive point you raise as well. You think he goes to a team like WAU and it just didn't work out for him, unfortunately. It seemed like this big fairy tale and it just didn't eventuate. And you raised a good point about the interview at the Grand Prix. We were lucky enough to speak to him as well in length after that race win, and he spoke about, I never felt like I lost it. I just didn't really have the right car underneath me and it just never really worked out. Obviously, Chaz was the star guy at that team, but I think the point about Nick, which is important to point to, is he's a guy who probably feels like he deserves to be a lead driver at any race team he goes at, and that was proof in the pudding. That win at the Grand Prix, holding off the two charging bulls, that was something else, but we have to make a point as well. MSR, they won that race in Tasmania with that pit stop, and that was justified by them making the final of the Pertec Pit Stop Challenge. So a big year for those guys on and off the track as well, and that's also extended to Cameron Hill as well. His first season last year was really, really tough. That big crash at Turn 8 at Adelaide, that's caught out a lot of guys, but unfortunately it caught him out this year, which we'll get to that in a second. But he's a guy who's really, really improved. 10 positions year on year in the championship, that's a massive jump.
I feel like he's really stood up to the challenge of having someone like a Nick Percat as a teammate. Jack LeBrock last year as a teammate, he's certainly no slouch either, and winning Matt Stone Racing's first ever race in Darwin last year. But Nick's really, you don't win Bathurst without some level of talent, and for Nick to do that on debut back in 2011 as well, I think really just further exemplifies the caliber of driver we're talking about here. And Cam kept Nick honest in qualifying all year too, so it's not like Nick really pulled that far ahead on raw speed alone. But I think Nick his experience in races, I think, really showed, especially with the two incredible race wins. So it's been a really impressive sophomore year for Cam Hill, knocking on the door of the top 10 in the championship standings as well, which that's really impressive for a second-year driver.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. So you look at the results for MSR in 2024, probably doesn't paint the most accurate picture of what that team actually achieved. Nick was 8th in the championship. Cam was 13th, equal on points with 12th, and they were 7th in the team's championship. And for a long time there, it looked like Nick could steal the top 5 in the championship. But there was a bit of a lull mid-season, and the Enduros just did not go to plan for those guys. But that race to fifth in that Adelaide finale was awesome. And it was, again, proof that when MSR delivers a good car, Nick's good. And again, there were moments for Cam Hill through the year they'd probably want to take back. I mean, that crash in Perth in practice was a bell ringer that, was probably flew under the radar. That was a big crash. And obviously Adelaide was spectacular. But any driver that can move forward 10 plus positions year on year in the championship is moving in the right direction, quite literally. So 2025 for MSR, there could be some things on the horizon. There might be a wildcard program that they're pretty keen to do, building new cars, new co-drivers, who knows. But the opportunity is there for these guys to steal a top 5 in the championship. I was pretty lucky to have a good chat with Matt Stone after the last race in Adelaide, and he said, look, the finals are coming in next year. Let's get both of our guys in it. Do you reckon they can do that?
I reckon they can, but there's also 22 other guys who are going to be very desperate to get into the finals, and it's going to really reinvigorate the cadence of a supercar season. There's going to be so much more to play for in the middle of the year. There's absolutely no reason why they can't do it, though. As much as Matt Stone Racing are a small race team, they're a very well-sorted race team, and I think we've seen that particularly this year. And as you said, making it to the final of the pit stop challenge, that's a really impressive feat for a small team like that. And to beat out teams like Brad Jones Racing to make that final as well. Brad Jones Racing, the acknowledged masters of pit stops for so many years now. So really interested to see how Nick Percat goes in his second year in particular, if he can carry that momentum. I feel like that fifth in the finale was a really important result for him, especially after that bit of a lull in the previous races. And as you said, the Enduros really did not go his way at all with Dylan O'Keefe. As for Cam, if he can keep on improving, then based on current trajectory, he will be inside the top 10. So that's going to be really interesting to see how he goes in his third season now at Matt Stone Racing. And he had a solid enduro campaign as well, 2 top 10 finishes with his good mate Cam Crick as well. So there's so many things to really like about Matt Stone Racing, and if they can really capitalize on those things and maybe improve on the areas that they do need to improve on, like maybe perhaps a little bit more consistency throughout a year, then they can become a force to be reckoned with and a real David versus all the Goliaths.
I think there's one stat that paints the story of Nick Percat's season is he was 13th on average in qualifying, but 9th on average in the race. So you do the maths, he was moving forward, and the overall grid, 24 drivers, on average start to average finish, he's 4th. So the guy knows how to race. I think one of the key things I look at in the off-season is qualifying these cars better, because it goes without saying, you qualify better, give yourself a better shot. But for Nick, who strongly believes he's top 5 caliber in the championship, and he was for such a long time this season, they need to qualify better. And if they can, I mean, they'll definitely snag some more wins, because you saw how easy they made it look at the Grand Prix in Tasmania. Nick could probably got out of the car and go, I always had it in me, but to qualify well, you'll race well. And I think those guys with good pit stops, they can get some more wins as well.
And as much as we're talking about finding one lap pace improvements, we're not talking about much here. Like, we're regularly talking about hundredths and thousandths of a second between cars in qualifying. So you're trying to find just the smallest little margins for such big gains. And I think Adelaide at the end of the year was a prime example of that. You got guys pushing to find such small margins and making these mistakes with big consequences, like unfortunately we saw with Cam Hill at turn 8. So, like, as much as we try to say it's not that much to try and find a few hundredths or thousandths of a second, that could even be a driver thing. But when everyone's pushing to find those small margins, it really makes that job just that little bit more difficult to, I guess, have those results and make those gains.
Well, we'll see a lot of those stories next year, Zach. We're going to keep pressing on with our Summer Cool Down series, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day guys, James Pavey here from supercars.com, here with my mate Zach Dowdle. G'day mate.
G'day Paves, how are you mate?
Not too bad. Let's get right into it with our Summer Cool Down season reviews, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Erebus Motorsport. What a season. What a year. Storylines, headlines, race wins. They had it all, but man, where do you start?
Oh, the start of the season, it's already been spoken about at length. Very messy. The sport wasn't the same without Brody Kostecki on the grid for the opening 2 rounds. If there's a silver lining to come out of it, though, and Todd Hazelwood did an outstanding job as a substitute, in my opinion, and having those miles under his belt, that only helped for his enduro cameo later on in the year, which we'll touch on soon. But that first half of the year for Erebus, they just weren't quite the same powerhouse team as we saw in 2023 that took on the fight to Red Bull and eventually beat them.
So to briefly recap, Zach, the first 2 rounds of the year, Brodie Kostecki, the reigning champion, was not there. And it was highly publicised, and a lot of people had bits to say on social media, which sometimes wasn't the greatest thing to see. But when he did come back, he was pretty good. I mean, he was in the shootout in Taupo, and there were results here and there, but ultimately reliability let those guys down the first few rounds. You do raise a good point, though. You know, Todd Hazelwood did a really, really sterling job standing in. And then Brodie got a podium in Darwin. You think, wow, okay, is he back? A little bit of speed here and there, but ultimately the results weren't quite there for these guys yet. They needed that confidence because, you know, when you're running off fumes after what has been a pretty tough year, it's not going to be the best for the results. And then everything changed again. I mean, you get to Sandown and the Enduros, and those cars were fast. I mean, the way that Brodie and Todd were racing at the start of that race, you know, Todd probably had flashbacks to going off at turn 6 at Sandown after that contact, but there was a clear shift down at Erebus. I think after Darwin, I think these guys, you know, where's the speed going to come from? How can we make this speed work? There are some very, very smart people at that race team, and they've been there for a very, very long time. And it just clicked all of a sudden, didn't it, about the Enduros? Those cars were fast.
I think a lot of that had to do with Brodie Kostecki getting the news out there that he is moving on to pastures new for 2025. I feel like there was definitely that sense of a massive weight lifted off his shoulders, and there was definitely that one single-minded focus from everyone at the team and Brodie of, right, water under the bridge. Let's forget about the start of the year. Let's just put everything in on winning Bathurst. And Sandown was a massive warning shot, and one that probably went a little bit missed just after they DNF'd. The car had pace at the start of the race, as you said, and Todd Hazelwood, incredibly aggressive against Jamie Whincup. I mean, Todd Hazelwood fighting the GOAT of supercars, and I mean, nearly got the upper hand, and it was, I mean, rough and tumble, puncture. That's just racing. It happens, especially in supercars. But then they get to Bathurst, and I mean, we get to Saturday, and I mean, no one saw which way they went, and same again on Sunday. Even if it was Brock Feeney just hammering away at the back of Brodie Kostecki in that last stint, and I mean, see how it was seesawing from anywhere between half a second to a second for that entire stint, and it was really. I mean, as much as it's cliche, it was probably some of the highest level motorsport that you could see. And Brodie stood up tall on that occasion and claimed the biggest win of his career. And that just sort of capped off the last 12 months for Erebus Motorsport to claim a championship win, well, a driver's championship and a team's championship, and then a Bathurst 1000 all in the space of 12 months against someone like a Triple Eight Race Engineering, who they beat on every occasion in a straight fight. That is seriously impressive for Erebus Motorsport, and they've proven that they're no longer the little battler punching well above their weight. They can be and are genuinely one of the heavyweights of the sport.
It almost seems absurd to say that it was an against the odds win at Bathurst for Erebus because of, on paper, great results. They were the reigning champions, drivers and teams, but the turmoil at the start of the year was extraordinary. But to turn up to a place like that, to race the way they did, let's not forget, Brodie Kostecki was crook. He was crook as a dog. So to be that strong in the race, both of them, Todd just did not put a foot wrong. But we did an analysis on supercars.com about Brodie's race performance in that last stint, and it was just unbelievable. Like you say, it was just, it doesn't get better than that. And I know people might watch races and think, well, where are the crashes? That might be the moment. But for us purists, you know, we're the guys that write the stories and see what's going on behind the scenes, all that sort of thing. That was a very, very high level of athleticism from Brodie Kostecki. And wow, I mean, he's a Bathurst winner. He goes to a new team as a Bathurst winner, but you go to the Gold Coast 2 weeks later. Was Bathurst a fluke? Absolutely not. Brodie smashed them again. It was almost more controlled because that place is really hard on the cars. It's hard on the drivers as well. Put it to good use again. And I mean, you know, closed out the year with Adelaide as well. A tough race there too. But Brodie proved to a lot of people, I have not lost this. I am strong. I am good at this. I'm good at what I do. And if I'm at a new team and perform, it'll just prove a lot of people wrong.
I mean, he's not just good at what he does. He's one of the best at what he does, Brodie Kostecki. And he really has that really hard racer's edge that arguably is the hardest of anyone in the field. It really is. No punches pulled, no give or take. It's Brody's way or the highway. And I think we really saw that at Bathurst in that final stint. It was go out there and you have to do a top 10 shootout lap for every lap to the checkered flag. And he did that for, 30 laps back to back to back, just shootout laps, no mistakes at all. Admittedly, it was the same for Brock as well. It was really outstanding motor racing. And, I mean, it really was perhaps the biggest indication yet that Brodie Kostecki, he still has got it, and Erebus Motorsport too. They also still have it, because as much as the driver gets all the accolades and all the headlines, the team have to give him a car to do that job. And Erebus Motorsport prepared an absolutely faultless Chico Roll Camaro for both Brodie and Todd Hazelwood, who also was outstanding in Bathurst.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. Fascinating footnote on 2024 for Erebus Motorsport is they're going to be a customer chassis supplier. They're supplying at least 2 new chassis for Dick Johnson Racing. Ironically, that's where Brodie's going as well. So this team knows they can win races and championships. They want to be an engineering powerhouse as well. That's a massive shot in the arm for those guys, to stand on their 2 feet. We can win races. We know how to do this thing as well. But to be able to go to other teams and say, hey, look, we're very good at this. Particular shout out to James White, the fabricator. He has built some Bathurst winners, some championship winners. So these guys are really, really good. But we can't talk about Brodie without talking about Jack Le Brocq as well. I mean, to move teams after a really strong season with MSR last year, he got that pole in Townsville, and you think, oh, wow, he could break through before Brodie does. But one of the best drives of the year that no one's really spoken about was Jack Le Brocq and Jaden Ojeda at the Sandown 500. I mean, that was awesome to start from the back and be running fourth until the final laps, and there was contact, unfortunately, with Matt Payne at turn 4. That incident masked how good that performance really was. So they get to Bathurst, and Jack Le Brocq is running in the top 4 as well. And unfortunately, they were caught out by a late safety car, the only safety car of the race, mind you, and they finished towards the back end of the top 10. So it was a season for Jack Le Brocq to feel a bit unlucky as well. I mean, you look at the results, the race head-to-head, he led Brodie 12-9, discounting the first 2 rounds as well with Todd Hazelwood as well. Qualifying is where Brodie makes his money. He led 15 and Le Brocq got 7. So team's championship performance, 6th overall for these guys. I guess you look at the fluctuation of their season, you're like, oh, wow, okay. 6th, pretty disappointing because you started the season as reigning champs. But I don't think they'll look at the championship order. I think they'll look at what they managed to achieve in the races towards the end of the year. And, if you can turn up the next year and say, hey, we've got a Bathurst win, and happy days.
Oh, man, it's the age-old saying, isn't it? Is if you have a bad season, all you need is a Bathurst 1000 win, and that turns around. And I think Erebus was really the epitome of that this year. There was a time where it looks like they were going to be buried in the team's championship, far down towards the areas of, say, 10th position in the team's championship, which that would have been a really, really tough result for them to back up a team's championship from 2023. But to have that strong form at the back end of the year, and particularly for Brodie Kostecki, as much as it's bittersweet that it was Brodie Kostecki and he now moves on, it's still a very promising trend heading towards 2025. And we haven't got a little bit of a sneak preview of 2025 with Cooper Murray jumping in to replace Jack Le Brocq at the Adelaide 500.
Yeah, before we get to Cooper, congratulations, Jack and Mackenzie. They welcomed their first child, so that was awesome news. It was pretty crazy to be on the ground for that unfolding. Cooper's there on Friday morning, getting in the car, getting in the overalls, but you followed his trajectory in the Dunlop series. Cooper Murray, he's really, really fast. If you're racing with Craig Lowndes at 888 in a wild card, it's a bit of a springboard to maybe get a main game drive. Cooper had been signed by Erebus before those 2 big races, but when those 2 big races came around, he was really, really fast. 5th at Sandown, running comfortably in the top 10 at Bathurst, and then those 2 races in Adelaide as well. He was racing with the big guys. So what do you think Cooper can achieve next year? Is it remiss to say he can't win a race? Do you reckon he can win a race? Are there poles? He loves the Gen 3 cars, so I think he's going to be one to watch.
He certainly can win a race, but what we've seen, it's very hard for rookies to break into this championship, particularly now when the margins are so tight. You only have to be on the wrong side of a 10th, and you could be 10 places back from where you potentially could be. It really is that close. So, if Erebus produce a car like they did for the back end of this season, Cooper's got the raw speed to do it. Whether he can and I mean, the Triple Eight thing has also proven that he can now string together the consistency in race performances, and to have the tutelage of Craig Lowndes as well to guide you through a race weekend, because there is so much more outside of driving a car than there is in the Dunlop series. So I think that's going to be a real big help for Cooper as well. Jack LeBrock's going to be a good teammate for him as well. Jack's really experienced now. I think a few people don't quite realise how experienced Jack LeBrock is, but and Jack's a really good guy as well. So you don't imagine that Jack will be keeping any secrets from Cooper at all. He'll want Cooper to flourish as well. And I mean, to have two flourishing drivers, I think that's what Erebus really want. And Erebus have proven time and time again that they have such a belief in young talent. And Cooper really is one of the brightest young talents on the supercar scene at the moment.
A really cool story to touch on as well with Cooper coming into the team is Brody's had a big role to play in that. There were photos at the ride day of those two talking together, being able to be trackside in Adelaide and then get in the car. Brody's at the same race. They're working together, and Brody's giving him an opportunity to, hey, look, I'm going to be your rival next year at a different team in a different car, but, we're part of the Erebus family right now. I want you to learn as much as you possibly can, because it's important to that team that Brody leaves, A, them in good hands, and B, gives an opportunity for a young guy to have some confidence, because Brody was there one day, when he was 22 years old, going on 23, 24, going into Erebus full-time. He was taking over from guys like Anton and Dave Reynolds, who had achieved already a fair bit by that stage, and now Brody's a Supercars champion, a Bathurst winner. I did love one of the press conferences towards the end of the year this year. Brody's like, I did Bathurst and Championship in 4 years. Cooper's got to do it in 3. So whether Cooper can do that, Cooper will know that. One of my other favourite things about Cooper is how strong he is. He's very, very confident in what he wants to achieve. He knows how he can do it. I truly think he can win a race next year. Where that is and how that is, who knows? But it is important that Erebus qualifies well for him to be there. I think it's the same story for LeBrock as well. That pole at Townsville, somewhat of an outlier because his average qualifying result was 9th. So for those guys to win races, they've got to qualify well. Obviously, it goes without saying, but I think Cooper's going to be one of the drivers to watch next year for sure.
And I don't think we ever saw the best of Cooper in Super 2, which is saying a lot because he was still very, very good in Super 2. I think there's definitely still a lot of untapped potential there, and Erebus always seem to get the best out of these young talents, and especially the Barry Ryan way always seems to extract something out of these young drivers, and that's going to be extremely beneficial for Cooper. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see Cooper Murray making a finals appearance next year, to be honest.
Well, it's a fascinating storyline for next year. You'll hear about other teams in pit lane as we continue our Supercars Summer Cooldown series brought to you by City Rural Insurance.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day, James Faber here from supercars.com. Welcome back to our Summer Cooldown Season Reviews, proudly brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Zach Dowdle, how you going, mate?
I'm good, thank you, Paves.
So we're rolling through the team, Zach, and we've made it to the top 5. And we've made it to the Shell V-Power Racing team. And wow, I mean, another extraordinary year for that team, given that all the changes are going on, all the changes that are going to come, which we'll get to in a moment. But a word on their performance this year, I mean, it's probably not what they would have hoped for.
It's not what they would have hoped for. And I mean, it's strange to say that Dick Johnson Racing haven't won a race this year. I mean, it's been a long time since they've gone winless in a season. And it's definitely not what they would have wanted. Ultimately, we've seen changes in personnel as a result. Anton De Pasquale on his way out. But there are things to look forward to in the future. And we saw in the last race at Adelaide, we saw Will Davison really fighting hard for a podium, which that is a real positive for the team moving forward. And hopefully we can see them returning back to where really they should be, further up towards the front of the field.
Well, you raise a good point there. There's a team of that calibre, they would want to get results. And unfortunately for them, one win in 52 starts in the Gen 3 era isn't where they want to be. So they've got a lot of changes coming, Zach. They're big changes. I mean, there were already changes about this time last year in December. Ludo Lacroix moved on. Dr. Ryan Story came back. And you think, all right, there's some clear intent to keep moving forward, because in those first 3 years of Anton and Will being the drivers, there were wins, there were plenty of poles and podiums, but not the killer blow that they would have wanted. And the first year of Gen 3 being the homologation team, they were under a lot of pressure. They didn't shy away from that fact. So this year to only have a handful of podiums as well would really frustrate them, and they probably vindicated by the changes that are coming, you think?
100%. And it just really has been. It's consistent, yes, perhaps, but it's not consistent where they want to be, which is challenging for wins, challenging for championships. Neither Will Davison nor Anton De Pasquale were in championship contention really at any point throughout the season, really not even right off the bat. So that will be really disappointing for them. And Dr. Ryan Story, he said it on the Cool Down Lap podcast several times now. This is not where he wants the team to be. And he said that in much more direct terms than that. But and we're seeing him now. He's really stamping his authority and saying, drawing a line, this is it. This is the lowest point we want to be at. From here on up, it's only onwards and upwards. And he's really swung some massive changes to make sure that that will be the case going forward.
I think if you're a fan of that race team, that's a good thing to hear. There's the accountability there. Not many sporting organisations and even race teams will have accountability. They'll try and look to excuses or look to incidents or things out of their control, but Ryan has been very, very steadfast in about saying, this is our problem to fix and we're going to fix it. And it's amazing to say that, given that they were fifth in the team's championship this year, which is definitely not something to sneeze at, but it was their first winless season since 2016. That was well and truly in the first few years of the Penske era, and they turned it around. They became the team in supercars. 4 years of Anton at the Shelby Power Racing team, lots of poles, lots of wins, but your assessment, because it really didn't really go to plan. I mean, 3 DNFs and a DNS this year, really frustrating.
It is frustrating, but it's really the poison chalice of when you're replacing someone like Scott McLaughlin, who was sensational, one of the best we'll ever see in supercars. That is an extremely high bar to achieve, and perhaps it was unrealistic to expect Anton to reach those same heights. Initially, there was promise. I mean, definitely that time in 2021 where the championship was based out of Sydney Motorsport Park for a few rounds. Anton De Pasquale was really, really strong there. Won plenty of races, got plenty of poles. Since Gen 3, definitely a bit more of a struggle for Anton, I think, from the Gen 2 era. Sure, he got that win in Townsville last year, but that was helped out a lot by a DNF the day before, which allowed him to save tyres and go hard on tyre strategy. This year, I mean, still, there was a highlight. I mean, winning the Jason Richards Memorial Trophy in Taupo. He didn't win a race that weekend, but 2 podiums for the weekend. That's a strong weekend, and arguably on the balance of a whole weekend, the strongest weekend he's had in the Gen 3 era. It just hasn't been able to match that since, and it really has been a struggle for Anton. And as a result, he believes that he can find more success elsewhere. So that'll be really interesting to see how that goes. But I mean, at the end of the day, it really is just sort of what expectations do we really have. And ultimately, he was drafted in to replace Scott McLaughlin. And when you want to replace someone of that caliber, you got to perform even somewhat to that level. And unfortunately, it just hasn't really gelled for whatever reason.
It was a fascinating, almost odd couple, wasn't it? I mean, you're getting Will Davison, who would missed out on a full-time drive in bizarre circumstances due to COVID and 23 Red Racing. Anton had well and truly, I think, proven himself at Erebus Motorsport. He got that win at Darwin in 2020. So when Scott went to IndyCar and Fabian Coulthard moved on as well, you bring in Anton, you bring in Will Davis, and he's like, okay, this is actually a really good partnership. And in the early races, they were struggling a bit. Even Scott leapt to the defence and saying, hey, look, this is a new era for this team. Even Penske's moved on. Got to give us some time. There has been time now, and you probably look back at those 4 years with those two guys together, and they would desperately have loved more race wins. I mean, you've got to look at the positives as well. I mean, Anton was amazing over 1 lap. Look at the results from this year, the head-to-heads. Anton led that 14-10 over Will. So Anton was always quite strong over 1 lap, but no wins this year would be the stat that really frustrates those guys. You got to look at Taupo as well. They were really, really good. And even Will Davison got that amazing pole in Sydney as well. So, Zach, you look to the last 4 years now of Anton and Will Davison at the Shelby Power Racing team. Where do you think it's sort of just missed out for those guys? Where do you think it went wrong?
I think anytime you take Team Penske out of any racing organisation, you're going to feel it. And that's no slight on the Dick Johnson Racing organisation in the slightest. They've still been one of the benchmark operations in Australian motorsport for going on 45 years now since they were founded. But Team Penske, they are one of, if not arguably, the best racing team in the world. You look at what they do in NASCAR, they're winning championships. You look at what they do in IndyCar, they're winning championships in sports cars even now. They've won Formula One Grand Prix way back in the day. This is a team that no matter where they go or what they race, they win championships and they win races. And when you take that element out, you're absolutely going to feel it. And you combine that with the homologation process for the Ford Mustang last year, which was a very troubled process. And we all know what went on with the parity thing last year in particular. And Dick Johnson Racing, they had to spend a lot of energy and time and effort and resource just to make sure that the Mustang could perform on an even keel to the Camaro last year. And I think that's definitely had an impact. And you fast forward to this year and the product's definitely a lot more equal now. And you just got to look at the team's championship. I mean, you got Triple Eight by far and away at the top, which I think you kind of expect looking at what they've had, because they by far had the two best performing cars. That's just motor racing sometimes. You're going to get that. But then it's Ford team behind in Tickford, WAU, Grove Racing, and then you got Dick Johnson Racing. And for the homologation team to be the fourth best team of that manufacturer, I don't think that's going to sit well with Dick Johnson Racing at all, and that's going to give them a lot of fuel and motivation for next year.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. So we'll get to Brodie in a second, but one of the key stories for me from this year was not only Brodie arriving for next year, but Will Davison staying. I think Will's had a solid few years. I think you look at the results spread across Anton and Will in their 4 seasons as teammates, it's 2-2. So Anton finished ahead in the championship twice, Will finished ahead twice. It doesn't really tell the full story of how they've gone in those 4 years, because Will has been a little bit better in race trim, a bit more consistent. Will's had 1 DNF in 4 years. And that was at Bathurst. He didn't really get the brake stopped at Griffin's Bend late in the race. Apart from that, he's finished every single race. No one else can hold a candle to that. So Will knows how to finish races. He knows how to get results. I think ultimately he would also be disappointed. I think he'd want to get more wins and more podiums. I mean, that podium at Taupo, there was a podium at Darwin last year as well. You'd want to be on the podium more than that in a few years at a team like that. But you do have to look to next year now. I think that team has had pretty consistent performance at the level they wouldn't want to. Now they're getting, he was the reigning champion in Brodie Kostecki. He's the former champion. He's the current Bathurst champion. And he's coming on really good form. Can Brodie push Will to a new level, vice versa? Does Will push Brodie to a new level? Do we not know until round 1 when they roll out with Erebus-built chassis?
I think it's hard to tell, and I reckon it's going to be hard to tell even in the early stages of the season. I think Dr. Ryan Story really summed it up well with this finals format. It gives them time to knock around a few singles, to use a cricketing term, to start the year. And it is summer, right? I mean, you know, they don't have to come out all guns blazing and start winning races straight away. Their goal simply has to be, we just have to be in the top 10 at the end of the Bathurst 1000, then we can really put our best foot forward. And I think if they have that sort of mature approach, there's nothing to say they're not going to win races whilst they're getting used to everything. I mean, Brodie Kostecki's Brodie Kostecki. If there's a race win on the line, he's going to go absolutely hell for leather to get that race win. It's just the way Brodie Kostecki's wired. And Will Davison, he's that sort of character where you know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get really rock-solid, consistent performances. And then if a result's there, he's more often than not going to take that result as well. Whereas probably Anton's still a little bit hot and cold, perhaps, and that I'll be surprised if that wasn't a consideration for them as to which driver they held on to going forward. But Brodie Kostecki to DJR, that's massive. Crossing the manufacturer divide from Chevrolet to Ford, going to the homologation team, to a team that's perhaps fallen down a little bit from the heights they once were at the back end of last decade. I mean, everything's there for a really successful partnership. If we don't see it at the start of the year, I wouldn't panic if you're a DJR fan, because it's a long season. It's 13 rounds. It's 34 races. And really the first part of the year is just going to be trying to get yourself in that position to fight for a championship at the back end. And I've got no doubt that at the very, very least, one of those cars will be in. But I think if both of those cars aren't in, then that could still be a bit of a disappointing season for them.
Another big change for the team next year is a move away from chassis built by Pace Innovations. You're getting chassis built by a rival team in Erebus. Take all the irony and the coincidence out of it with Brodie and the engineers coming to the team. That would have taken a fair bit of swallowing some pride for DJR to go, this is a big change for us, but we're really determined to get results. We're going to make this change. And, doesn't matter what people say online. They haven't even seen the fruits of it come to fruition yet. If that works, that's an absolute masterstroke.
As much as Penske are no longer at the team, Penske is still there in a sense that DJR still have that sheer bloody mindedness of win at all costs. That is a very Penske mindset to have. Bringing in all of the Erebus staff, those key staff such as George Commons and Tom Moore, and I think Tom Moore and Will Davison, that's going to be another really interesting combination to keep an eye on, because Tom, he is a very bright young engineer, one of the best in the paddock at such a young age already. And Will's a very technically minded driver as well. So, who knows? That could become a really happy marriage as well. But the Erebus chassis, that's going to be massive for the team. And as much as it would be a real ding to the pride of not using the Pace Innovations chassis, using an Erebus chassis, it's a proven product. It's beaten Triple Eight in a straight fight on more than one occasion. You've got the bare bones of the car from Erebus, sure, but at the end of the day, it's still a Dick Johnson racing car. It's still going to be a Ford Mustang body shell. It's still going to have Shell V-Power stickers all over it. It's still going to be run by Dick Johnson Racing engineers. So as much as it's an Erebus car, it's going to be an Erebus car in, well, really the barest form only. It's still very much going to be Dick Johnson Racing's product at the end, and I think we'll see that on track.
Given how big the swings have been, would you be surprised if they won a race in Sydney straight away in February?
Very, very surprised. As much as Brodie Kostecki and Will Davison are two very good drivers, particularly so for Brodie, you can't make all of these changes straight away, and particularly with only having one test day before the season starts. It's going to be a very, very big learning day for them in the preseason. And then, the start of the season, that could be a bit more of an extended test session for them, just in a competitive environment. Who knows? I'm sure Dick Johnson Racing and Dr. Ryan Story will have a very detailed plan of what they want the year to look like and specific targets. I'd be surprised if race wins were immediately at the forefront. But in saying that, it's Brodie Kostecki, and as I've said, if there's a race win on the table, he's going to go for it. So, and if he does get that at Sydney, then that is a massive warning shot to the rest of the field.
Well, Zach, if Brodie and Will are going to win races next year, they're going to have to get through a lot of other competitive teams and drivers to get there, which we'll talk about in more detail on our summer cool-down season reviews, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day, welcome back to the summer cool-down season reviews, proudly brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. I'm James Pavey, supercars.com lead journalist, with my colleague and mate, Zach Dowdle. How you going, mate?
Good, thank you, Paves. Getting into the real business end of things now.
We really are, Zach. 4 teams left to talk about. Penrite Racing, Grove Racing, as some would know it as well. Fascinating season and almost a curious case of what could have been for these guys, because there were massive glimpses of performance and also huge moments of heartbreak as well. But start of the year, Bathurst 500, Richie Stenaway was equal 4th in points. Matt Payne was quick over 1 lap in the early rounds, and then what transpired across the following rounds and to the end of the season, no one could have predicted.
Almost a little bit of an enigma season for Grove Racing. Really, as you said, quite curious. On their day, absolutely breathtaking, particularly Matt Payne with that win in Townsville on that really aggressive strategy, and nearly backed it up the following race in Sydney on an equally curious strategy call, which nearly paid dividends. But And just, again, a little bit of inconsistency that really cruelled their season. And in Matt's case in particular, some really big mistakes that I guess still show that he is inexperienced as much as he is one of the real stars of the category. And then on the other side of the garage, the curious case of Richie Stanaway's solo supercars career continues. Flashes once again, but when it matters most, just couldn't really capitalise.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. We've spoken a bit about Richie in our premiere New On Racing episode of this series and how there is a lot of potential still kind of yet to be realised, and that's sort of the same for Matt Payne. But there were talks at the start of the year. He was like, I would like to fight for a championship because we know we can fight for wins. But you look at the end of season standings, he was over 1,000 points behind our champion, Will Brown. That's a lot of points. So for those guys looking to next year, they know they can win races. So you're thinking about the finals, there'll be a lot of potential there to get some results. But they're bringing in some new blood in Kylan, which we'll get to in a second. But the high moments for this year for Penrite Racing, clearly you touched on that win in Townsville. That was brilliant. The way they executed that strategy and were able to put it to work was really, really strong. The next round after that, Matt Payne did it again, nearly beat Chaz Mossett in Sydney when Chaz was the clear benchmark. But it's the lows that really undid their season as well. I mean, Sandown with the crankshaft failure for Richie, which was quite frustrating because he was looking really promising in those early stages. And then Bathurst as well with Matt crashing at the cutting, Richie being fuel poor as well. A lot of moments that the team would rue, given that, they finished fourth in the team's championship. In the early days of the season, they were second. They're like, we're genuinely second. 888, pretty quick at the moment. But do you think they'll be disappointed with fourth overall?
I think so. As much as definite improvements across the balance of a whole season, as opposed to last year, they had a really strong back end of the season. Again, it's probably not quite where they want to be. And both Stephen and Brenton Grove have made no secret that they want to be right up the front challenging. And you look at the background staff they've brought in over the course of their journey in supercars, the likes of David Couchy, Grant McPherson in particular. They've got all the ingredients there. It just needs to all combine now and really sort of get those results. And it's just not quite there yet, but you can definitely see the direction they're going.
Yeah, well, Matt got, trophies in Melbourne. You got trophies in Townsville and Sydney as well, but 9 results of 13th or worse. I mean, that sort of sums up the season. It's rocks and diamonds. Tasmania could barely crack the top 20. So he's got so much raw pace, so much raw skill as well. And it still kind of feels like that team's kind of working it out, even though they've got amazing firepower in the sheds. David Couchy, Grant McPherson, Al McVeigh, guys who know how to win races, championships, Bathursts. But Matt Payne still kind of feels like the raw product, and he's definitely coming out of his shell in the media and talking to journos like us. He's happy to throw in one-liners, and one of my favourite interviews all year was in Sydney after he passed 2 guys at turn 1, and you could find the story. They're pretty good quotes, but he's coming out of his shell, and it's sort of reflected by his upswing in performance. I mean, his rookie season last year was pretty tough. That rookie seasons always are. But his performance year on year is really impressive. But again, there'll be moments this year when they'll be like, oh man, what could it have been? I mean, to have that incident in the last race in Adelaide, unfortunately, that pushed him out of the top 5 in the championship. Tom Randall got ahead of him. So little moments like that across the season, you can't really afford. And now looking to the finals as well, I mean, you just can't slip up.
No, 100%. And you look at the start of the year, Australian Grand Prix, had that tangle with Cam Waters fighting for the lead. And then copped an absolute spray from Cam Waters afterwards. And then obviously Bathurst crashing out would have been a solid result. Wouldn't have been a win or a podium, but a solid result. And that's a big bag of points you lose there anytime you have a crash. And I mean, ultimately to be the only car that doesn't finish the Bathurst 1000 on such a big points day, that's always going to hurt you. And then, as you said, in the finale at Adelaide, that incident he had as well. Again, those mistakes prove that as much as he is incredibly quick and he still is the raw product, he still makes these mistakes from inexperience. And that's going to happen when you're in the heat of the moment. But again, the Groves have a safeguard for that with Garth Tander in your corner as a mentor and a co-driver. I mean, that's a guy who's been around the block more than a few times and knows what it's like to be that young guy coming onto the scene and having these tough initial years in supercars. So, and that's also a relationship that's really starting to blossom as well. We saw Sandown 500; they were both very strong. And I mean, as I said, Bathurst not quite, but even then, Matt was provisional pole sitter on Friday. So the glimpses are there. It's just a matter of bringing them all together and to build a championship caliber season. That's, I think, the next step for Matt Payne and Grove Racing.
Yeah, they've got the puzzle. I think they're just a few pieces short at the moment, but the results sort of paint an accurate picture of that season. I mean, Richie started really well at the Bathurst 500, and then Matt just took over, really. I mean, the head-to-heads, Matt led 18.6, and the races, Matt led 13.10, which is quite interesting. You know, Richie had those moments at the start of the year, sort of had some bad luck in the middle of the year. You think about incidents like Perth when he sort of just got checked up by a gear change and got sent into the wall. But Richie's end to the season was beyond admirable for me. I thought that was really impressive, the way he was able to find pace in practice at Tassie and Sandown to top sessions in supercars. You know, that's not everyone could do that. And then to be the lead forward for most of the great race was really, really good too. But it was the front row in qualifying in the shootout at the Gold Coast that made me go, okay, Richie's going to Premier Racing next year and he's going to go there with a head full of steam. The sad part about that whole bit for me was that accident in Adelaide. You know, we didn't really get that final send-off, and Richie didn't get that final send-off from the team, which after the year that he'd had so many headlines about performance and what's going to happen next, could he even get a drive next year, you know. To have that accident qualifying, you know, he could have plugged it on the front row again and he could have been fighting towards the front, but I don't think it's at all fair to look at Richie's end-year position of 19th overall because it does not paint the right picture for him. But I think ultimately as well, Penrite Racing, they're losing a driver of high calibre. Someone who's won Bathurst can get results, but they're gaining a driver with arguably the highest ceiling in supercars at the moment. Kai Allen is not even 20 years old. You've written a lot of stories about Kai this year, Zach. I mean, he's the real deal in a lot of circles. I mean, you don't impress a team like Dick Johnson Racing by accident. And now Grove have got him. The Groves have got this young guy and they have an opportunity to now mould two young guys. You know, I wrote a story the other day. It's going to be the youngest pairing on the grid for nearly 20 years. So we know what Matt can achieve, but what do you think Kai can do next year?
It's going to be really interesting. We spoke a few episodes ago about Cooper Murray, Kai Allen's former Eagleston Motorsport teammate, who's joining Erebus next year. It's going to be really interesting. We've had this conversation around the office in the weeks leading up to this, is that they're two really interesting prospects for next year, because Cooper Murray could potentially have the better peaks, or the bigger peaks and bigger troughs, the more standout results and the perhaps more low light results, whereas Kai could probably potentially have a more consistent season. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they sort of pan out at the end of the year. I mean, this is a guy who is the youngest ever Super 2 Series champion, which is almost a bit of a prerequisite of becoming a bona fide superstar of the Supercars Championship. And he nearly backed it up again this year. And it was ultimately a really, really tough weekend at the Bathurst 1000 that undid that championship charge, which at the beginning of the year, it looked like no one was going to touch him. So it's going to be really interesting for Kai. The thing is with Kai is he can't get too disheartened if it is a tough initiation to supercars, which it very well could be. We don't know. But at the end of the day, he's only 19 at the moment. Time's on his side. So if it doesn't work out at Grove Racing, there are going to be other teams that are going to be hunting his signature. There's no doubt about that. But I'm sure that Grove Racing will be doing everything they can to make sure that this partnership does work out. And who knows, if Kai does come on the scene and immediately proves himself to be a very reliable runner, maybe that could be the thing that pushes Matt Payne further forward into championship contention too. So it's going to be really, really interesting.
The good thing for the Groves, and you raise a good point there about Kai's age, you know, they took a leap of faith on Matt Payne when he was the same age, if not younger, a few years ago. I remember he rolled out in a solo practice session at Sydney Motorsport Park, and people were like, this is a pretty big deal to give a young guy these laps. But fast forward 3 years, Matt Payne is sixth in the championship this year. He's a multiple race winner in supercars, poles, podiums. He knows how to do it. So I think the Groves can probably look to that and say, hey, we've already done it once with Matt. We can do it again with Kai. And arguably, Kai has achieved much more in a touring car to that age than Matt ever did, because Matt, had a lot of background in karts, bit of tin top stuff with Porsches and things like that. But a supercar is a different beast, and the way that Kai's been able to just get a media footprint, be confident and calm with journos and fans and sponsors, and be at a team like DJR, which has massive standards, and a lot of fans go to a team like Grove Racing, which has same standards. They just want to win. He just seems so calm, and it's quite crazy because, and it's also kind of scary because I'm nearly 10 years older than him, and he's more relaxed than I am. I worry about coffee orders and things like that. And Kai's like, it's just all part of my day. I'll just get in the car and go racing. But he's really exciting for me, and the fact that he and Matt are teammates as well. I mean, they could be anywhere from around the back to literally getting 1-2s in races, in my opinion. Will Kai win a race next year?
Hard to say. I mean, based on his trajectory and his form in Super 2, you'd say that it's almost a lock that he'll get a race win next year, but it's just so hard to do that in supercars nowadays. And I mean, we've seen with the second car at Groves, it can be a bit of a hit or miss entry. I mean, even the first car with Matt Payne, that can be a bit of a hit and miss entry too. So I think a lot of it's going to be dependent on the team as well, how they roll out. It's going to be really interesting though. Kai's definitely got the talent to win a race, but I mean, talent can only get you so far in supercars. There's a lot of things that have to go right to get a race win at any point.
Well, Penrite Racing, Zach, they've got a massive ceiling, as we've said. 2 young guys, a combined age of about 41, which is just ridiculous to think of. But a lot of other teams we'll talk about in our summer cool-down series, proudly brought to you by City Rural Insurance Broker.
He's now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
G'day, James Pavey from supercars.com. I'm here with Zach Dowdle, my mate. How you going, mate?
I'm good, thank you, Paves.
Well, we are getting into the deep end of our supercars grid. We're on the summer cool-down, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers, and we've reached Walkinshaw and Drury United, Zach. And wow, I mean, what a season for those guys! A massive roller coaster. You could write a Bible about what went through their year, but an early shout out for Chaz Mostert, one of the great individual seasons without winning a championship, you'd say.
It's such a weird one, Walkinshaw and Drury United, because this season's the best one they've had in a very, very long time, yet still there's so much of a sense of what could have been. I mean, as you said, Chaz Mostert, what a season he had. I think very strong case you can make that that's the best season Chaz Mostert's ever had, certainly since 2015 when he was with ProDrive and was maybe on for a championship charge had he not had his Bathurst accident in qualifying. First time, well, it would have been the first time since Newcastle 2017 that he was in championship contention for the final round. Had things gone his way at the Gold Coast 500, but that middle part of the season for Chaz Mostert, I think there was a run of 5 straight podiums for him, and that really brought him surging back into championship contention. Really, one of the great championship turnarounds in recent memory for supercars, but ultimately it wasn't quite enough. And but I mean, what a season for Chaz Mostert, and really he has that entire Walkinshaw and Drury United team really galvanised around him, and he's really doing great things with it.
Yeah, you talk about turnarounds. It was quite fascinating to know that they had the ability to do that. That's hard enough as it is. I mean, to be fast at different stages of a season, to get results at a different stage of a season, at different tracks, enduros, sprints, whatever. The ability to leave Darwin over 270 points behind, that's Chaz, and to be right behind Will Brown just before the enduros was quite extraordinary. I think that the turnaround was 279 points into 63 midway through Tasmania. So you do the maths, that's a lot of points to claw back. Obviously, Will had a bit of a trip at Townsville, but winning both races in Sydney, I think, was a big thing for Chaz. Obviously, he missed out on that win in that awesome battle with Cam Waters in Townsville, but the Sydney results for me were quite telling in the way that the season was going at the time for Walkinshaw, because they'd had moments where they'd like to get that back. You know, you look at Topor when the wheel came off, that was a massive turning point. We'll get into turning points in later, but being able to string together consistent performance is something that has really hurt that team in recent years, and they were able to do it. But ultimately, like we've said, it was the the one percenters have let them down. And, the CEO, Bruce Stewart, has said that in press conferences, podcasts, to media. They know where they slipped up. We don't need to talk about it too much because they know that's what the focus is going to be for them. But on the driving side, Chaz was fantastic. But I think you'd have to say it was kind of a season that may have gone begging for those guys.
100%. I mean, even pre-season, there are a few question marks about what sort of challenge Chaz Mostert could put up because let's not forget that in the pre-season, there was an engineering change for Chaz. Adam De Bore, his long-time engineer, they've formed such a fantastic rapport over the years. He stepped aside and in came Sam Scafidi from Tickford, who was one of the, I guess you could say, victims of Tickford's downsizing in the off-season. And there's a lot of questions about, is that really the right move? Like, it's Chaz and Adam De Bore. They're one of the best driver-engineer combos in pit lane. But I think that was very quickly proven that Chaz and Sam really know what they're doing together. And I think Sam Scafidi's really brought something out of Chaz that we haven't seen in a little while. And it's sort of an extra hunger, I think. And once that Chaz had that run in the middle of the season, there was a lot of people who were thinking, oh, gee, he might get this, And ultimately, there was a run at the end of the season that started at the Sandown 500 with a mistake by Lee Holdsworth, which very rare you get a mistake from Lee Holdsworth, but that is very costly in a long race with big points like the Sandown 500. And ultimately, that started a bit of a slide. They had a really good day. I think they said it was a perfect day at Bathurst, but ultimately, all they could produce was fifth. That's just the performance they had on the day. And then, and then you go to the Gold Coast where, nothing went his way. They had the gear position sensor failure on Saturday that cost him bulk time in pit lane. And then on Sunday, pit lane dramas again, fuel tower mix-up. They used the wrong fuel tower that didn't have enough petrol in it anyway. And, that ultimately ended Chaz's championship charge before he really had a chance. But then you go to Adelaide and he really put that behind him. And on Sunday, probably say he should have won. Maybe he could have, should have. Look, hindsight's 20/20 and all right. And at the end of the day, Chaz is a racer. He sees a car that's trying to pass him for the win. He's going to race it. It's just human nature. And ultimately, he and Brock Feeney came to blows when Brock had that time penalty for contact in the pit lane and an unsafe release. We saw that Sunday race. It was an absolute beauty, and it was because Chaz was pushing so hard, and that was a real feature of Chaz's driving throughout the season, was pushing so hard. And even when he didn't qualify well, especially on the super soft tyre at the likes of Darwin and Tasmania, he would still come roaring through the pack and get a really, really strong result. And that really kept him in the game.
It was fascinating to watch this season unfold from the 25 Garages perspective because for a guy who's been around for more than 10 years now, the thought of Chaz not winning a championship doesn't really sit well with me personally. I think he's a guy who's achieved so much and yet his best finish in a championship season is third 3 times. So it was his best chance so far. I think in 2015, Frosty, Mark Winterbottom, they were teammates. Chaz was coming hard, but Frosty really got that gap well and truly between him and Chaz had to fight back. Chaz brought it back even closer this year against a different team, a different drivers. So, I don't know. I think it's just it is a case of what ifs for that team. How many of those little blips that they would want to claim as being frustrating and some of them just bad luck, you don't know. But Chaz is very pumped about the finals. I think you could see that when we were at the launch in Bathurst. He was like, his first word was wow, wow, this is really cool. And the opportunity is there for him now to take that next step in his career and try and win a championship. But I think crucially, they can't finish 2025 like they finished 2024 because, Sandown, Bathurst, Gold Coast, even Adelaide, the Saturday race, the clutch wasn't very good on the warm-up lap. That's a lot of points to seed. And you go from 60-odd points behind the eventual champion to nearly 400 behind. You've had a few slip-ups. But Chaz, well done, massive season. Ryan Wood, rookie. It's tough in supercars being a rookie, isn't it? But he acquitted himself quite well, didn't he?
It's tough, but he's quick on his day, isn't he? We saw a bunch of standout qualifying performances from Ryan Wood throughout the season. I think to Perth, WAU's first front row lockout, and who knows how long. It was a long time coming, and we saw last year in Super 2, Ryan Wood especially quick at Perth, and that translated. was very, very nearly a maiden podium on that day as well, had it not been for, well, it was really selfless team play to try and fend off Cam Waters and protect Chaz's lead at the head of the field. And I mean, I think that was really something that we didn't see from Ryan last year, which obviously it's Super 2. You're not expecting, team orders in Super 2 or anything like that. But Woody really acquitted himself as a real team player. He knows that it's Chaz's team, for lack of a better term. But in saying that, there's still so much promise there, and there's no reason why Woody can't one day be on the same level as Chaz. Because, I mean, I'd much rather have a quick driver to slow down than a slow driver to speed up. And I mean, Woody's got speed and absolute abundance, and he's proven that on more than a few occasions this year. In the wet at Taupo, that race performance in particular, that was also really impressive. Again, another near miss for a maiden podium. So, I mean, the potential's there, and the results, they're not consistent, sure, and getting the season off to a start of 0 points from 2 races at the Bathurst 500, definitely not the start you wanted, as much as arguably neither incident were of any of his making. He was just an innocent bystander, but he definitely recovered very well from that, and the potential's there, and I'm actually really excited to see how he goes next year too, because he could be another one who could potentially benefit from this finals formula of, you've really got to perform when it matters most. And it's sort of similar story for Chaz as well. 2 biggest wins of his career, 2 Bathurst wins, and that's the biggest day of the year, and you've got to stand up on that day. And if Chaz stands up on that day, then, who knows what could be in store for Walkinshaw Injury United in 2025.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. We compare them to other teams. I think few teams have more redundant head-to-head stats than WAU. I mean, Chaz was 22-2 in qualifying, 21-3 in the races, but that doesn't tell the story of either of their seasons, really, because Chaz was up against Triple Eight. He was up against Cam Waters as well, and for some parts it was up against Matt Payne as well. And more often than not, he either beat them or well and truly was close to them at the end. He wasn't flogged. There was no massive tyre degradation. There were no huge strategy slip-ups. It was just those little blips in the races and little moments. You look at like even that Sandown spin, a lot of those things that were out of his control sort of put a damper on what was a really strong individual season. But the most important stat for me for Walkinshaw Injury United is wins. That's proof of where they are as a team, is if they're winning races. I think Chaz won races in 2021, he won races in 2022. Didn't win races in 2023, the first year of the Gen 3 era, those guys in forwards, but still finished 4th in the championship, which you talk about the P word and everything else about last year, that's a really good result. So to be one position higher in the championship after all of that, with all those wins and poles and podiums, he'd be disappointed. But if we're talking about people who can make an impact in the finals, I think Chaz Mostert can, because we know how well he can race with a bit between his teeth. And
you mentioned like Bathurst wins but no championship. It's almost a bit of a reverse Glenn Seaton in that aspect for Chaz. I feel like it would be an injustice if Chaz was never to win a championship, but I mean, that's just motor racing, isn't it? It's just sport even, things aren't just handed to you on a platter. You've got to go and earn them, especially at this highest level. And finals are really going to make drivers earn championships. And, it's going to really suit the guys who are really hard racers, and, they put their best foot forward when the chips are down. And Chaz is definitely one of those guys. We know he's really strong at the finals circuits as well, although he's never won a Sandown 500. I mean, there was still enough pace there this year to at least be solid, if not really challenging. But Gold Coast and Adelaide, we know that Chaz is really strong there. I mean, even with the gear position sensor failure on Saturday on the Gold Coast, Chaz was still the fastest car on track.
It was.
I mean, if that doesn't tell you just how high of a level Chaz is operating at this year, then I'm really not sure what does.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing how those guys go next year. We'll talk about other teams in our Supercars Cooldown series, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers.
He is now in 2024 the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
Welcome back to our summer cooldown season reviews, proudly brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. James Pavey from supercars.com. My mate Zach, how are you going?
I'm good, thank you, Paves. Nearly at the end of this series.
Nearly at the end. We've got 2 teams to go. And this team, wow, what a return to form for Tickford Racing, Zach. I mean, 4 wins, plenty of poles, plenty of podiums. We'll get to that in a second, but you got to start with the rough stuff first. I mean, how they got to 4th and 5th in the end. A tough start to the season. I mean, Cam Waters was unbelievable at the moments that we saw him. But to be 388 points down behind round 3, I mean, that's pretty tough to take.
Yeah, you just don't win championships from that position, do you? It's sort of that magic 300-point mark of a whole event's worth of points. If you fall anywhere behind that at any point of the season, it's incredibly hard to make that back up. And ultimately, it was the case for Cam Waters. But I believe one of your stats from the season was after Topor, I believe Cam was collected the second most amount of points behind Will Brown for the season. So if it wasn't for that start of the year, then Cam would have been right in contention for the championship. But, I mean, Bathurst 500, he was crook. The car wasn't quick. It's just not a good way to start your season. You're always on the back foot after that. And then Australian Grand Prix, it was better, but ultimately got put in the wall by Matt Payne unintentionally. But I think we even saw the reaction from Cam after that shunt. He was mightily annoyed. And I think, yes, a lot of that is because of the incident and getting swiped into the wall by your opponent when you're fighting for a race win. But I reckon there was a lot of frustration of, oh my word, I've just lost my championship fight right there and then. And only the 5th race of the season. Like, yes, it's early to be thinking that, but at the same time, it's just, you're just throwing away too many points so early in the season. And no matter how hard you try, no matter how well you perform to end the year, unless you're winning race after race after race, there's just no way you can really make it all back up realistically.
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. And then they started winning race after race. Wins in Perth, Townsville, Tasmania, Gold Coast, 4 very different racetracks and different events, different lengths of race. Cam was brilliant this year, there's no question about it, but you have to look back at the first 3 rounds and go, that's probably where the championship was for him. But when he was good, he's probably one of the most spectacular guys out there. But Cam, you expect that level of performance. He's been up there for a long time. One of the great stories from this year, from my perspective, is the resurgence of Thomas Randall again, someone who's really taken a liking to Gen 3. I mean, his first season in 2022 was really tough. You know, they talk about those big accidents he had at Tail and Bend off the start, you know, things that were kind of out of his control. But he gets to Gen 3, he's 13th overall, he's getting podiums and poles, and you're thinking, okay, Tom Randall, like, he's got real performance. This year, 5th overall. I mean, I'd dot my hat to Tom Randall because you don't finish 5th in a supercar season by fluke. But I guess now the real progression for this team, which is the lead forward team for the year, which is something we'll talk about in a second, Tom Randall's going to want to win races next year because now we're talking finals. That's a big thing for them. I
mean, you're looking at the list of drivers next year who will be hunting for their first race win, and Thomas Randall's probably top of that list, isn't he? I mean, we talk about Cam Waters having a really strong season, but arguably an even bigger beneficiary of Tickford's downsizing from 4 cars to 2 it was Thomas Randall. You get more focus on him being the second car, not having to worry about the other 2 cars. Gets to work more closely with Cam Waters and his engineer, Sam Potter. And I think that really started to show, and particularly in the back end of the year. I mean, you look after Darwin, and Thomas Randall was 14th in the point standings. I mean, that's exactly halfway through the season. So the first half of the year wasn't anything special for him, but then he started really consistent. Top 10 results after top 10 results, starts getting a few podiums here and there as well. And then, I mean, the Gold Coast, the Saturday on the Gold Coast, a real banner day for Tickford, finishing 1-2, Cam Waters, then Thomas Randall. And then all the dust settles after Sunday on Adelaide, which, mind you, took a fair while after everything that happened on that day. And all of a sudden, we're looking at the final point standings and, hold on, Thomas Randall's 5th. How did that happen? And really impressive. And you wouldn't say it's exactly undeserving either, as much as, and you look at the 4 guys who are ahead of him, they're the usual suspects you'd expect to be ahead. So a really, really good season for Tom Randall and arguably one of the MVPs of the season.
So looking to their results from this year, the head-to-heads, Cam Waters in qualifying leads 18.6, in the races at 17.7. But when Randall was quick, he was really, really quick. He even got a few poles, and he could have beaten Cam to some poles as well, but obviously we know how good Cam is over one lap. I think we should also give a bit of praise to Simon Brookhouse, the new CEO of the team. Tim Edwards, who's now with Supercars, was with Tickford at the helm for a long, long time, and Simon's come from different sporting backgrounds. And to come in, I briefly spoke to him after the Bathurst 500, and I was like, it's a pretty tough caper. A wheel's come off, your boy's sick, and Tom had mixed days. It was like, well, that's motorsport. We've got to expect to go with the highs and lows. They've done that all season, and they're the lead forward team, which is going to be a massive source of pride for those guys. But 2025, a familiar face is coming back to the team, which we'll get to in a second. But would you be at all surprised if both cars were in the Championship 4 in Adelaide?
Oh, I wouldn't be totally surprised at all, no. And I mean, if Cam Waters in particular is in the Championship 4, then he goes all right at Adelaide. So, I mean, look, I think if you're looking for a driver who's probably going to be the biggest beneficiary from finals, I think it probably could be Cam Waters. He's had a little bit of a taste of NASCAR now from earlier in the season. And, I mean, I think Cam really likes to step up in the big moments as much as he hasn't got a big win of a championship or a Bathurst yet. I mean, I think Cam, he really likes that American style of racing too, and that sort of real emphasis on winning at the back end of the season. I think that's really going to suit him down to a T at 2 circuits or 3 circuits even that he really loves. He's won races on the Gold Coast. He's a Sandown 500 winner. And, I mean, last year he won in Adelaide as well. So, I mean, you look at that, and that's a pretty good record to carry into the back end of next year. And even Thomas Randall too, if he can finally get that monkey off the back of that first win, who knows? Maybe that's going to open the floodgates for Tom Randall, because this is a guy who's a Super 2 champion. He knows how to drive a racing car. So Tickford are in a really good spot at the moment, I think.
Well, it goes without saying you've got to start a season well to be competitive, but there's a lot of confidence that they can finish well because Mark Winterbottom's coming back into the fold. He's joining Cam Waters, arguably one of the strongest enduro pairings of the last 20 years. And Cam Waters has had some pretty good guys in his corner. James Moffat in recent years, Michael Caruso, David Russell. But to have Mark Winterbottom fresh out of the full-time game, you've seen a few guys come out of the full-time game this year. Scott Pye, for example, he was brilliant at Sandown, and he made the mistake at Bathurst, but managed to turn it back around because he's still got that fresh racer's edge. Getting Frosty in your car and in your team and being able to mentor you again and having that existing relationship, and also Frosty as well going to mentor the young guys coming through for Super 2 and the Tickford Autosport program, that is a massive, massive get. And I think people are probably seeing the fairy tale aspect pretty well, but the performance side of that's going to be huge for Cam, because let's say he could get a podium at the Bend, podium at Bathurst, probably more. Frosty wants to win Bathurst, so they're going to be going after it. The confidence alone of having that person in your corner, I think, is going to pay huge dividends for someone like Cam, and even Tom too.
I mean, look, as much as James Moffat and Michael Caruso, they're solid co-drivers, absolutely, and very, very good on their day. But, I mean, I'm sure they'd admit it, and I mean, I don't think it's too far of a reach to say that, you know, Mark Winterbottom, he is an upgrade. He is quite possibly the number 1 co-driver in the field now. I mean, this is a guy who has taken on Jamie Whincup, the GOAT of supercars, for the entirety of his career. And yes, Jamie Whincup got the better of him most times, but on his day, Mark Winterbottom got the better of Jamie Whincup, and he's got a Bathurst win and a championship to prove it. So, I mean, I think Cam is just, has to win at Bathurst at some point. He's always so fast there, and to have a steady hand like Mark Winterbottom, who is also very fast at Bathurst, it's just such a good recipe. And I would be very surprised if there weren't already a few people who might be looking to put a bit of money on Cam Waters and Mark Winterbottom to maybe get that Bathurst win next year. And I mean, we've also got the pre-Bathurst Enduro, which is now at Tailem Bend next year, and that's going to be a bit of an unknown. We've never been there for an Enduro before, and we haven't been there. We haven't been there this year, so it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. But Bathurst is the one that everyone wants to win, and Bathurst is, I mean, it's the final before the final of the regular season, I guess you can say, before the final start as well. You're going to have an Enduro Cup champion crown there as well. So that's a guaranteed spot in the finals if you win the Enduro Cup. So I think there's going to be a lot of people looking for very, very strong Enduro performances, and Tickford have laid down their marker by bringing back the prodigal son.
Well, it could bode well to be a very, very big season for Tickford, among other teams as well. You can catch all the other reviews in our Cool Down Summer Series, brought to you by City Rural Insurance.
In 2024, the Repco Supercars Champion. And what a drive today.
Well, welcome back to our Summer Cool Down Season Review Series, brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Zach, we're at the finish line. Our final team, what a season for Triple Eight Race Engineering. We know them as Red Bull Empire Racing as well, but 11 wins, over 30 podiums, 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship, a comfortable Teams' Championship win. I mean, outside of Bathurst, they won pretty much everything, but, round of applause for Will Brown, a massive title win for him, but that was a hell of a season by those guys, wasn't it?
It turns out life without Shaman Gisberg, it isn't so bad after all, Paves. Wow, I was not expecting that, especially from Will Brown in particular, to come into a new team, perhaps a little bit of a question mark, because after all, he was a championship contender for most of last season until it fell away in the back end of the season. He was even leading the championship heading into the back half of the season, and then it all fell away, and his then teammate, Brody Kostecki, swooped and claimed his maiden title. But a lot of question marks because Shaman Gisbergen, I think we can all agree, he is one of, if not the best racing driver on the planet at the moment. And then for Will Brown to come out and just casually breaks a 40-year record of on his way to winning his maiden championship, I mean, what a season for him. We should also put in a word for Brock Feeney as well, because he had an equally brilliant season. 9 times out of 10, Brock Feeney's season would see him walking away with a championship trophy at the end of the year. It's just, unfortunately, his teammate, he did a historically good job this season, and as much as it's gonna sting for Brock for sure. I think he would have come into the season thinking, right, I've got a new teammate, I can lay down my territory. This is a team that I know. I might have the upper hand. I won't say should, might have the upper hand. And I mean, ultimately, I think Will Brown's come out and proven to a lot of the people that he genuinely is the real deal.
Yeah, you've got a feel for Brock in a way. Imagine ending a year with an average qualifying result of 4.83, an average race result of 5, and not winning the championship. I mean, that's almost unheard of. But the story of this year for those two guys, they were 1-2 in the championship, and probably rightfully so. The team made the fewest mistakes. But Will Brown's bad days were better than Brock Feeney's bad days. And that's ultimately where the championship was decided. You look at the times where Brown, okay, he wasn't the fastest guy, Cam Waters or Chaz Moster or even Matt Payne, they were quick, but he's on the podium more often than not. I mean, we spoke about that 40-year record. I was trying to dig that out after Gold Coast. I was like, is this a thing? And I spoke to our mates at V8 Sleuth, and sure enough, they found it, they verified it, and it went everywhere when Will got that podium and then that win in Adelaide, which was cool to see because that's a true reflection of his performance. But for Brock, he'll probably look back and go, yeah, like my bad days probably cost me the year. But his good days, he was untouchable. I mean, that Saturday performance in Adelaide, all he had to do, all was asked of him, was to win that race, and he flogged them. But ultimately, unfortunately for Brock, Will was always just nagging away, making sure he got the next best result. And I think that's where Will won the championship, because Will didn't win more races than Brock. Brock won more races, took more poles, but Will was constantly on the podium, 19 podiums in 24 starts. And if you're pulling up numbers like that, you're probably going to win the championship more often than not. The head-to-heads, I mean, it probably tells the story of the season as well. I mean, Brock led in qualifying, Will led in the races. It wasn't blowouts for either by any means, but I think you've just got to dip your hat to Brock and Will, because they both went really well, but it was a guy that was a little bit better at the clutch moments that brought it home.
I mean, Will did to Brock what Triple Eight did to just about every other team in the teams fight even. You look at what Will did, and he punished any and all of Brock's mistakes on his bad days. And Triple Eight, they punished any and all of basically every other team that was in Teams Championship contention. They punished all of their mistakes throughout the course of the year. And I mean, you look at the gap in the Teams Championship at the end of the year, and Triple Eight are head and shoulders clear of Tickford and WAU. So, I mean, what a season they've had. They've been the benchmark in supercars for going on 2 decades now. And I mean, there's a reason for it. They're just so uber professional with everything they do. I mean, what more can you say about them that hasn't already been said, really?
Before we get into too much detail, Zach, let's get a message from our partners. Our season reviews are proudly sponsored by City Rural Insurance Brokers. City Rural, a subsidiary of the Cowden Group of companies, has over 50 years' experience supporting their clients. They offer a range of specialist insurance from heavy industry to food trucks. They are your insurance pit crew. Head to cityrural.au. Yeah, it's a fascinating story to see them be at the top for so long. You think of footy codes or cricket or any other sport. If you're at the top for 20 plus years, you'll go down as the all-time great. I mean, you have to, right? That's a long time at a professional level in the modern era. And for this team to keep producing these amazing drivers and give them time, I think Jamie Whincup said right at the start when he retired and Brock Feeney came in, I've got to give this guy at least 2 years to see what he's capable of. In 2 years, Brock won an Adelaide 500. He won Sandown 500. This year he was winning races for fun. But when he wasn't winning races, he wasn't in contention. And I think that's the thing that they're going to want to fix for next year, because we'll prove more often than not that, okay, if I'm not the fastest, I can be the next best. And sometimes that's good enough to win a championship. Quite extraordinary that Andrew Edwards, who engineered Shane Van Gisbergen to great success, formerly of Brad Jones Racing as well, he said, Will got in the car at the pre-season test in February. I knew we could win the championship. And Will was pretty outspoken in the way that, you know, if we don't win the championship this year, it's my fault. I dip my hat to that as well, because that takes guts to say, I know the team can do the job. If I don't do the job, then that's on me. So how that plays out next year with the finals, it'll be interesting, because ultimately when Will was 180 points ahead going to Adelaide, there was a little bit of comfort. He didn't want to touch the trophy, neither did Brock, superstition there, but he had that buffer. He was able to sort of just get the result he could in the Saturday race, cruise around on Sunday, even though he got turned to the back and passed a million cars. But that's going to be one of the stories of next year, I think, Zach, is how does Triple Eight manage this? Because it's going to go to the next level with the finals, with the Enduros playing a key role as well. How these guys are going to race through Gold Coast, Sandown, Adelaide, if they're both in the top 4. There has to be some sort of contact. There has to be some sort of no inch given. And how they manage that is going to be tough for Triple Eight, I think. I mean,
we got our first real glimpse of that at Taupo on the Sunday, where it was Brock v. Will for the race win. And it was a very clean yet very hard-fought battle for the win, which ultimately Will got the upper hand. And that was a real sort of statement victory early in the season of I'm the guy to catch. And we sort of never really saw it boil over at any point throughout the year, which is remarkable in its own right, because they are 2 extremely hard races, and they're young, they're ambitious, they want glory. And I mean, at the end of the day, they're in the best place for it. There's no 2 ways about it. So that's very interesting. And I mean, with Will wrapping up the title on the Saturday in Adelaide, that gave Triple Eight sort of an ability to use Sunday as a grand final in its own right. And we saw the way Brock drove on Sunday. He was not leaving anything on the table. And I mean, meanwhile, Will Brown, a little bit further back, also not leaving anything on the table. So, I mean, if that was a sneak preview of what we can expect next year, especially at the Adelaide Grand Final, that's going to be super exciting to watch. And I mean, it'd be a very big surprise if there aren't 2 Triple Eight cars amongst that Championship 4 at Adelaide. But you never know. That's the beauty of this final series. You can have one bad weekend. You can even have one bad race, and it brings your whole season undone. So it's going to be super interesting. And I mean, I spoke to Jamie Whincup at the launch of the finals series in Bathurst about how he would treat a scenario where it's the 2 Red Bulls nose to tail, whoever finishes ahead wins the championship. And he said, they're races. They can have at it. We trust them. So that's a big vote of confidence to have as a team boss, when you can trust your drivers that much to not run into each other or put each other out and into the wall, especially at Adelaide.
I love what Jamie said after Adelaide. He's like, I hope Brock is hurting from this, because it means that Brock, he already had a lot to play for next year, a lot of redemption. Last year didn't go to plan in the championship, this year as well, being beaten by a guy who had just arrived at the team. But for Jamie to say defeat is going to make Brock Feeney is going to be really cool to see, because Brock's going to come out swinging, no doubt about that. But then Will's got the number 1 on his car as well. So they've both got a lot to play for. ultimately Triple Eight's a team that doesn't like to look over its shoulder because, like Dick Johnson once said, all you get is a sore neck. So, yeah, I'm really fascinated by this battle for next year, how it unfolded this year. It was pretty gentlemanly, and they're good mates. I mean, you can't put hyperbole on things. They are good mates. Like, I followed them into the track in Adelaide one day, just joking and laughing and having a great time. These guys are fighting for the biggest prize in Australian motorsport. So Triple Eight will have a big job on their hands trying to keep them on that path, because if they're happy, they're going to be fast. So I'm really fascinated by it.
I mean, there's a reason why Brock Feeney is driving the 88 car at Triple Eight Race Engineering. He was the guy chosen to replace Jamie Whincup. That is massive praise on extremely young shoulders at the time. And I mean, within 12 months, he was an Adelaide 500 winner. So the guy has the potential. He dominated Super 2 the year he won it in 2021. He was running the car number 888 in that year. I mean, that was a pretty clear sign straight away that 888 had found their successor to Jamie Whincup. And Brock Feeney still is that successor to Jamie Whincup. As much as he hasn't got a championship win or a Bathurst to prove it yet, I mean, age is still very much on his side. And this could be the best thing that has ever happened to Brock Feeney, getting beaten in a head-to-head fight. He hasn't had that chance to fight for a championship yet. Shane Van Gisbergen has been the number one's maybe not the word to use, but he has been the clear leader of that team. Now with Will Brown's come in, he had a chance to, I guess, re-establish himself as that team leader, and Will's come in and done an exceptionally good job. So, but we go to Sydney next year. Everyone's on a clean slate once again, aren't they? As much as Will's going to have the number one sticker on his windows next year, Brock's going to be sitting alongside him in the garage all year, and he's going to see that number one on the other car. That's going to make him extremely hungry to swap those stickers over onto his car at the end of the season.
Well, Zach, I'll see you in Sydney. I'm so excited for next year. Early tips, predictions, or we'll just keep it close to our chest for now?
Oh boy. I can't possibly predict. It's going to be very exciting next year. A lot of changes coming our way that are going to be super exciting for the sport. And I mean, I just can't wait for the end of the year already to see how this final series works. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch.
Well, make sure you're trackside or watching from anywhere around the world, SuperView, TV, what have you. It's going to be a massive 2025 Repco Supercars Championship. Zach Dowdle, thanks for your time, mate.
No, thank you, Paves. Pleasure to be on.
So that brings an end to our summer cooldown season review, proudly brought to you by City Rural Insurance Brokers. Until then, see you in Sydney.